If the group manages to safely cross the Lake of Mercury, they will reach Uyuyatmog's necropolis. This is a replica of his city recast in terracotta and basalt. The doorways are skewed, the angles are jagged, and the rooftops and towers are slanted. Every inch of the city is covered in hieroglyphics and sculpture, layer upon layer upon layer. There is a psychotic beauty to the place, a reflection of the madness of its inhabitants. Now, the interesting thing about this necropolis is that it is shaped directly according to Uyuyatmog's perception of his subjects. So, for example, the normal people, peasants, their houses are represented as miniature houses. And as the ranks go up, that is, as you reach the temples, the monuments, the barracks, the fora, they are larger edifices. And of course, Uyuyatmog's palace is huge. It towers above the entire city, and the streets are filled with these clay statues that are obviously the previous inhabitants of this necropolis that was once a great city. Well, as great as it can be in the Empire of Xi'an. They remain eternally trapped in expressions of beauty and monstrous anger. Nothing can be heard in the city but silence. It is very useful that with this document you have the player's map of the entire city. That is a map without keyed areas, so as to not spoil or reveal the things that are going to happen. If you want your players to have a map that they are discovering in a sort of fog of war style, or perhaps you want to cut the map in pieces and hand over those pieces as the players explore this city, this player's map truly makes it quite easy to navigate the city while getting a good sense of the layout. It is quite possible for the player characters to step over the houses made of terracotta because they are miniature houses, or perhaps to break through the different edifices in the most vulnerable areas of their structures. However, this is going to generate noise, and the chances of a random encounter, a very nasty random encounter, will go up. There are all sorts of encounters that could happen within the city. The city is plagued by walking dead. You'll find members of the different factions trying to get the upper hand within the city. You also have the Azarog, which is basically an eldritch horror that can raise the dead in the city as it hovers around. The player characters will have to face not only Azarog, but the newly raised undead, so it is a very challenging encounter. I will give a brief overview of the different factions near the end of this document, but for now it is sufficient to say that some of the members in these factions will do everything in their power to get into the palace and take the riches within, or anything of value. But another faction is hell-bent on stopping all intruders because they consider the entire place as a holy site, especially because of the presence of a very strange tree. We will get to that in a few moments. So as the player characters try to make their way through the different gates, they may end up encountering a deadly trap that, if modified or deconstructed correctly, could provide a very powerful weapon. It's basically a scythe trap, and you can remove the blade to turn it into a sort of makeshift sword that is made of a special steel, and it is quite damaging. In other places, you can see the souls trapped within the city as you stare deep into the walls. Faction play will be extremely important within the city. Some encounters may actually be positive encounters, at least for the moment, as the player characters contact other members of their allied faction, and they may actually choose to become allies of antagonistic factions, at least for the moment, to gain more insight about the layout and the whereabouts of different places and objects and beings within the city. But if the player characters do not participate in these different factions' affairs, then encounters will be more difficult, because now the characters not only have to contend with the horrors within the city, but also with other adventuring groups. And there are some very bizarre, very unusual locations here. You will find what is basically the head of a fallen god. It is still alive, in a way, and if you manage to manipulate it just right, you may obtain some cryptic phrases or prophecies. If you manage to decipher them, they may actually assist you in getting out of the city alive and perhaps even defeating its master, although that task is almost impossible unless very specific circumstances take place. There is also this large crystal tree that serves as the focus for one of the factions cult or religion. If the characters manage to be a bit diplomatic with this faction, they may actually unravel the mystery of the Infinite Dart, one of the most potent weapons that they can use against the horrors in the city, but also against Uyu Yathmog. Negotiations need to be handled intelligently. Some factions may require the characters to compromise or dedicate themselves too much to their cause. Some may even ask for the characters to sacrifice something or someone very valuable to them. Now, when it comes to the Palace of Unquiet Repose itself, the entrance is cursed. There is only a very specific way to penetrate the palace in a more obvious way, but it is only accomplished if the player characters have been paying attention, talking with the members of the different factions, and if they are carrying some valuable objects with them along the way. It is also possible to try to infiltrate the castle by climbing it, but they will have to fight against these Spire Guardians, these gargoyle sort of enemies that are perpetually produced by the palace. It is possible to gain entrance in this way, and through other uses of perhaps magical items, artifacts and spells that the characters have obtained in previous adventures, but getting into the palace is going to be one of the greatest challenges that the group will face. Inside the palace, it is a scenario of nightmare. Just take a look at this corridor that you can encounter, all of those mouths covering the walls, the ceiling. If the player characters enter this area carelessly, I'm sure you can imagine what will happen to them. There are also many random encounters within the palace. They could encounter horrors, the guardians of Uyu Yathmog. They could encounter members of other factions and even phantoms. Now, it is quite clear that Uyu Yathmog, with his practices of cannibalism, of torture and sacrifice and mutilation, he has some very interesting tastes when it comes to pleasure, and there are these beings known as glass concubines. One of them even has a draconic centaur sort of form, and they will try to seduce the player characters and nail them to the bed. Even if someone isn't into these glass concubines, their charm ability still presents a threat. And there are some very interesting, perhaps even crucial areas within the palace. For example, a seemingly impervious pillar that actually presents the support for the entire palace. If the player characters decipher how to bring it down, they can destroy the entire palace, along with them if they are not careful. And there is a throne room with the reanimated corpse of a demigod chained to it. This is the only area that allows access into the chambers of Uyu Yathmog. So the characters, they could try to defeat this demigod, this undead demigod, but it is quite impossible, to be honest. It is much better to trick it, to lure it someplace so that the chain gets wrapped around some pillars or some obstacle, and the player characters could gain access, could run through the place to reach Uyu Yathmog. The group could also run into the Master of Ceremonies, who is a being that is not exactly completely sentient, and they may actually obtain some information from him, but if they displease him, the Master of Ceremonies may end up throwing handfuls of gore at the player characters, and this is cursed gore. If you get hit, you will end up cursed, suffering a heavy penalty to your attack rolls and saving throws. There is no shortage of places to explore within the palace, and this is only the first floor. You can encounter a vast hall of crimson marble and obsidian, rows upon rows of terracotta figures frozen in positions of attention, Kopech swords poised to strike down on wary intruders. You could also find a great room with floor, ceiling and pillars of polished obsidian reflecting the distorted images of the player characters. The player characters may end up fighting distorted copies of themselves, or nightmarish reflections rather. If the party manages to survive all of that, they will reach the second floor of the palace. This is where Uyu Yathmog resides, or what is left of him. It is at the end of these halls of the damned that they will find Uyu Yathmog, the Prince of Sion, the Archmage, the Devourer, a gigantic, mutated carcass sitting on a throne. It reminds me a bit of that scene in the film Alien, where they encounter this space jockey, but here you find this deformed, mutated deity that resulted in such a state by seeking to escape damnation, merging his soul with those of the relatives he consumed. The process was partially successful, and the thing that was once these souls can no longer pass through the gates of heaven nor hell. Even if its physical body is destroyed, it would simply reform on the throne in a few days. throne, body, and spirit. All are part of Uyu Yadmog. Uyu Yadmog is not without diplomatic skills. He will, or it will, attempt to recruit the player characters to guard him from many of the other factions that seek his secrets. However, if the player characters do not reach an understanding with Uyu Yadmog, they will have to confront him, and he is quite impossible to defeat. This is because each round Uyu Yadmog animates the dead from among the bodies on the floor, and there are many dead around him. He will raise skeletons, ghouls, shadows, ghosts. He will even feed upon the very essence of the player characters. They only stand a very small chance of defeating him if they use the right weapons, the right resources, and if they have made some tenuous alliances with the correct factions within the course of this adventure. Most groups of adventurers will escape Uyu Yadmog. Those that are stubborn enough to try to defeat him will be killed, and their souls will surely be damned. However, a very lucky few may actually figure out the puzzle that comprises vanquishing Uyu Yadmog once and for all. If the player characters manage to survive this, there are different ways to reach a conclusion within this adventure. They will still need to navigate their way out of this damned site, and depending on what they do, perhaps by destroying the pillar, or because the very will of Uyu Yadmog causes the entire structure to collapse, escaping with their lives and the riches that they have obtained will not be easy. There are many ways to deal with the outcomes of this adventure, and if there are unresolved plot hooks, or many things that they encountered during the adventure, this is just the start of a longer campaign, or perhaps the root or the seed for many adventures to come. At the end of the document, you have several appendixes. You have Appendix A featuring the factions, such as Sial Atun. This means the knife palm. They are the greatest warriors the world has ever seen. Men shudder at the sight of their gilded mail and impassive cold eyes, and tremble at their calculated atrocities. All of this faction section contains information on the members, the non-player characters related to the faction, their agendas, their objectives. You also have the children of the tree. The Sialatun were not the only ones lured to the palace with visions of paradise. Long years ago, the father led his flock across the sands and discovered a passage, now collapsed. When they had no more light and men were being taken in the darkness, they found the silver tree. For long years they have lived in that stone garden, nourished by the fungus growing on its skin and protected by its silvery light. They believe it is the tree of God and will protect their sacred site from all perceived threats. You also have the Nine, the cultists of Xian. When Xian fell, not all of its lore was forgotten. Some have preserved its ancient knowledge and dream of its return. These are the Nine: scholars, criminals, necromancers, slavers, killers, and prophets of the blackest hearts. They can be bargained with, but never trusted, because inside the palace there is knowledge that they crave. Then we have Appendix B, magic items, such as the Cask of Unknow, a cursed urn of coarse grey stone and cryptic, murky carvings. This artifact gives you an exceptional chance of hiding from your opponents and even surprising them, but it feeds upon your personality. And you also have the Infinite Dart, a slim branch from the Tesseract tree, infused with silvery light. The dart can only be wielded by someone who has given his eye to the Tesseract tree. The dart strikes unerringly at the heart, dealing exceptional damage, especially to undead creatures. The dart can be recovered and reused, of course. You also have things such as the Tome of Iron and Glass, the Grimoire of Uyu Yadmog, a storehouse of lost arcane knowledge dating back long ages. Not only can it be used as an offensive device, unleashing a myriad of magical effects, hidden within this tome is the complete method of entering the vaults of oblivion, and it also contains a map of the recursive labyrinth leading to the weapon. These are two possible future adventures that are going to be released eventually, so there's going to be a continuation to the setting of this adventure module. Appendix C contains the horrors of the Age of Dusk. It is a terrifying bestiary containing things such as the Azarog, an ancient horror, the result of Uyu Yadmog's research into the soul and the nature of damnation. A chimera of spirit, soul, and sorcerous substance. It exists partially in all realms and fully in none. A tortured non-being. It can invest corpses with a fragment of itself, yet it remains whole. There's also the empty man, an abomination of sorcery, mind, and flesh. The empty men are weapons of the wars of ages past. The empty man is a band of men fused together telepathically until each body has access to the total experience, knowledge, languages, and skills of the whole. Each body perceives what the whole perceives. You also have the glass concubine I mentioned earlier, which is an automaton of impossible, lascivious beauty, with nubile shapes of azure glass, luscious locks of spun electrum, and perfect platinum enameled faces. Creations of the long-lost artificers of Zembar, the glass concubine was forged to fulfill any carnal desire. To enjoy the tender caresses of these creatures is to enjoy bliss itself, and it's also a pleasurable way of achieving an early death. There are also the guardians of Uyu Yadmog. To hunt down his wayward family members, Uyu Yadmog hired bands of ruthless thugs and killers. Little did they know they would serve him beyond death. Their mummified hides embedded with the gemstones of their reward, they guard the palace with the tools of their ignoble trade. There are also the wolves of the final night. The end of time, when all suns have burned out, all matter turns to ash, and heat is but a memory. These things hunt the final night. They are terrible things. The wolf of final night is a nightmare from beyond the end of time. Its shape is a monstrous silhouette etched in absolute darkness. Its touch is oblivion, and the cold of all things ending. They can be called and bound, but they can never be controlled, not for long. All of these aberrations will be found within different places around the city and inside of the palace, and they also appear as a result of a random encounter. You also have Appendix D, featuring the Age of Dusk, the setting of this module. These are the last tales of humankind. It is an age of great wonder and dying sorcery. The world writhes and spasms in the aftermath of the wars of ages past. Magic itself is now a tattered thing, twisted for millennia into shapes ever more complex and potent. The corpses of gods, shattered and broken, drift and coalesce within the tempest or lie pristine upon the hot sand, untouched by the ages. Great spires, like jagged teeth, stand amidst the savage lands, their undying inhabitants warring ceaselessly for the magical energy that sustains them. Mankind is as it ever was, fractious and struggling, yet unbowed, trapped in an endless violent cycle of growth, stagnation, and collapse. These are the tales of the Age of Dusk. Appendix E comprises the Cyanese inscriptions proper for this module. Here lies great Uyu Yadmog, Prince of Princes, Lord of High Sorcery, Devourer of Souls. And Appendix F, which is specific for the Dungeon Crawl Classics version of this document, contains patron rules. The most powerful entities found within this Citadel of the Damned are contained here, such as the Tesseract Tree, a power older than the gods. The Tesseract Tree has appeared before mankind to herald in the passing of the age. Its numinous rays brought sentience and freedom to the proto-human tribes in the thrall of terrible demons of stone. It was there when the first gods set foot on the earth to receive the terrified worship of the sons of man, and it was there when a second sun appeared on the plains of Zriatus to consume the pantheons of the world in a storm of eldritch fire. You have a list of the results when you invoke this patron. Maybe the tree manifests itself for a single segment of eternity. The caster may make a single alteration in the ever-branching pathways of the future. He may elect to reroll any one attack roll, saving throw, skill check, or spellcasting check in a number of rounds following that and take the second result. Or maybe the caster decides life and death according to the unfathomable will of the Tesseract Tree. In his hands, he is given a number of infinite darts. The darts last for 1 hour or until they are cast. They may not be picked up and reused, however. We also have spells of this patron, such as Still Violence. With the power of the Tree of God, all violent impulses are quenched in the hearts of men. The caster can warp others in an aura of stillness, where all else becomes impossible. This magic is effective against all sentient creatures. Maybe it manifests as a gentle aura of luminous light, which shimmers from the caster. Or maybe it is a gentle chiming of brass bells that fills the air. When it comes to some of the results, maybe a single creature within an area is bathed in gentle rays of peace. They need to make a will save or be overcome with extreme calm. If the creature tries to attack, it will suffer a penalty, but maybe you achieve an even grander result. Perhaps an aura of absolute stifling power freezes the very air within a great radius around the caster. All creatures within the area of effect must make a will save to do anything but sit peacefully and be unable to take any action. There's also to reach beyond the bulwarks of eternity. Only the power of the Tesseract tree can reach beyond the gates of heaven. For a short amount of time, the caster can reach beyond time and space and imprint upon the crude clay of the world the soul of those long dead. This spell returns a dead person to a semblance of life. When it comes to the results, maybe the caster calls back the spirit of one who has passed and invests it with temporary existence. The shape is an imperfect semblance of the subject in life. It has half its original hit dice and ability scores. It can speak, but it is too clumsy to handle anything more complex than a rock or a wooden club. It cannot perform complex operations requiring dexterity like writing, casting a spell, or picking a lock. The body dissipates after a turn. The spell affects anyone who has been dead for less than a month. You also have better results. For example, the caster calls back the spirit of one who has passed and invests it with temporary existence. The shape is an idealized semblance of the subject in life. It has maximum hit points from its original hit dice. Its ability scores are increased to 15 if they are not already at that level. And they gain a bonus to attack rolls, casting rolls, saving throws, and skill checks. The body dissipates after a day. The spell affects anyone who has been dead for less than 1,000 years. When it comes to the patron taint results, maybe the caster begins to manifest the injuries of his predecessors and successors. The first time this result is rolled, he now bears stigmata on his neck and arms that do not heal, reducing his stamina by a single point. The second time, the caster receives markings along their neck and in their side, further reducing their stamina by 1. The last manifestation of this effect connects all the markings on the head, body, and limbs into a single wound, the sign of the Tesseract tree. The caster's stamina is again reduced by 1. When it comes to spell burn effects, maybe the caster's image blurs and splits as their essence expands across multiple dimensions. When they reform, part of their body and parts of their soul are left behind. Next we have information on Uyu Yatmog, of course. The Archmage, the Prince of Princes, the Devourer of Children, the greatest of the Siamese. When he saw the terrible new age his brethren were creating, he hid away in the dark and silent places of the earth. Faced with the promise of eternal damnation, he conceived a plan to merge his soul with that of his close kin, to mold his spirit into a shape too vast and alien to pass through the gateway of death. Now he is eternal, a gnashing, screaming multitude of spirits molded together into a single monstrous thing, trapped in a cage of rune-etched bone. When you contact Uyu Yatmog, it could be that the master heeds the caster's entreaty and sends a minor emissary. From the salt and sand rises a guardian of Uyu Yatmog. It obeys any single command and carries it out to the best of its ability, or until an hour has expired. After it has achieved its task or the duration of the spell expires, it collapses into a pile of dust. Or maybe you achieve an exceptional result. Perhaps the master sends a cohort of his servants to do his bidding. Many guardians of Uyu Yatmog are instantiated from the soil. They will obey any single command and carry it out to the best of their ability, or until a day has expired. After they have achieved their task or the duration of the spell expires, they collapse into a pile of dust. There are also spells from Uyu Yatmog, such as Sao Discord. By reciting the 9 forbidden glyphs of Yod Nlum, you awaken the secret hatred in men's hearts. This spell only affects living, intelligent creatures from the material plane. In order to maintain this spell, the caster must have a line of sight to their target. Unlike many other spells, unless someone is directly observing the caster, it is not obvious that they are casting a spell. When it comes to the results, perhaps a creature within a certain distance must save against the check or become bitter and quick to anger. Any negotiations or charm attempts while the target is under the spell will fail, and any insult or slight will be met with violence. If the spell is disrupted or ends, the target knows they have been bewitched. More impressive results, such as a number of creatures within a certain distance must save against the check or become filled with hatred against a particular target of the caster's choosing. It doesn't even need to be in the same room. The creature will attempt to inflict violence on this creature with Berserker Fury, heedless of their own safety, and getting a bonus to all attack rolls while doing so. There is also the Curse of Dancing Stone. By harnessing the terrifying alchemy of Zion, the caster can disrupt a target's vital processes with a mere touch. This power works only on the living. Constructs, elementals, extraplanar creatures, and the living dead are immune to its effects. When it comes to the results, perhaps on the next round, the next attack the caster makes forces the target to make a fortitude save versus the check or become sickened, taking a penalty to all checks and a penalty to armor class for the next hour. A greater result could be that the caster blazes with disruptive energies. Until the next sunrise, all successful attacks the caster makes force their target to make a saving throw versus check or become petrified. Any damage the caster inflicts is added to his current hit points. Any excess over the total is added as temporary hit points that dissipate the next day. Any creature that makes a successful attack against the caster must make a fortitude save versus the check or they become petrified. Any living creature that comes within a certain distance of the caster must make a fortitude save versus the check or become paralyzed for a number of hours. Petrified creatures animate the next round, acting as zombies, with an armor class of 15 under the control of the caster for the duration of the spell. When it comes to some patron taint results, maybe the power of Uyuyatmog twists and changes the caster. The first time, the caster's eyes become jet black and lidless. The second time, the caster's features harden and all hair is lost. The third time, the caster becomes the spitting image of Uyuyatmog in life and will draw the attention of any cultists of Xian. When it comes to spellburn results, maybe ethereal spirits howl and tear at the caster as they muster the arcane energies. The spellburn manifests as a gaping wound torn in the caster's face and chest. Appendix G is a complete map of the necropolis. Appendix H is an overview map. And those are all the contents within this document. So what do I think of the Palace of Unquiet Repose? Truly, one of the most extraordinary old-school Renaissance modules out there. It is great that it is available in 3 different versions, that is, Old School Essentials, Labyrinth Lord, and Dungeon Crawl Classics. That way, you can choose whatever system you like, and you can convert this module from any of those 3 systems into many other retroclones, pseudoclones, or D20 based systems. As I hinted at the beginning of this review, I highly recommend that if you are looking something more gritty, more deadly, you stick to the Old School Essentials version. But if you want to raise the level of power a bit, go for Labyrinth Lord. And if you want weirder, more epic experiences, get the Dungeon Crawl Classics version. Although, make no mistake that all of those versions are deadly and will easily result in many total party kills if the player characters are not skilled, are not smart, and are not lucky. This document also proves that you can take elements that have been used in other adventure modules and still give an original or fresh take. For example, it is obvious that this module contains several elements inspired by the story of the Emperor of Qin and his tomb surrounded by a lake of Mercury, or river of Mercury rather. That tyrant and his terracotta army have been used, for example, in the introductory module, the zero level funnel that comes within the Dungeon Crawl Classics core book. But here, those elements are combined with the horrors of cults of old, for example the cult to Val Allah, with cannibalism, idol worshipping, and human sacrifice. What I truly like about this adventure module is that the story, the background of this Palace of the Damned is revealed little by little by taking a closer look at the murals, the engravings, the reliefs, the paintings, the objects, anything found within the city is going to present a macabre revelation to the player characters. They know what they are getting into. This is the sort of module that is going to have the stomachs of the players wrenching. They feel this need not to go into the palace. If they get immersed, if a skilled referee or game master and an enthusiastic group really dive into this module, they will feel as if they are marching into their doom. They will feel that tug in their guts that they shouldn't go in, but because they are driven, perhaps by glory, perhaps by greed, perhaps by lust, they will keep on going, even if they lose their lives, even if they lose their very spirits within this city of the profane and the damned. I also consider that the placement of the traps and the enemies and hazards is quite exquisite. You do not feel like it's an entire zoo or safari within this adventure site. The placement of all of those lethal encounters is handled perfectly. Those enemies appear in those sites because they are related to the past of those locations, those structures, those areas, those zones. The same for the traps. They are placed there to keep people away from certain areas or to kill them outright. The factions involved also present many opportunities for roleplay, for diplomacy, for tenuous alliances and backstabbing moments, of course. So my highest recommendation for the Palace of Unquiet Repose. Remember that you can place this module in any setting of your own creation or those settings that have been designed for your system of preference. Please check out the links in the description below for some recommendations. Thank you so much for watching this review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those that have been supporting the channel by sending Drive-Thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.